What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office. It's actually a nice day, kind of sunny, still cold. You probably hear the heater running behind me. So yeah, just want to say thank you for everybody, the subscriptions, all that stuff. Every dollar helps. You just don't know, man. Like, so grateful for all of it. And I know I'm hit or miss on these things. I don't have the frequency that I used to have. And maybe that's a side effect of growing, you know. The old days I had time. Maybe I didn't have time, but it felt like I had time to do more of these and that kind of stuff. And then now, I mean, we're just, the workload, the part sales, just everything going on is just crazy. So I appreciate you hanging on for all of these, and then all the donations and everything. It's just super helpful, because it's not just me, you know, like Brad, the guy that actually edits and produces these things, makes that sweet intro music. I got to pay him for his services and, you know, the hosting and all of that. So it's these aren't free for me to make, so I appreciate you guys kicking in, and you know, it all goes towards the greater good. So shout out to Joe Welby, Facebook, International Scout Owners of the World Parts and Advice. It's a very large Facebook group. I suggest you guys join it if you're not part of it. Don't fall for the imposter pages. There's a couple knockoff pages run by some scammer guys trying to capitalize on Joe's page's success. Don't fall for it. Make sure that it's the International Scout Owners of the World Parts and Advice page, or Advice and Parts. It's got a trailer to it. You know, look on there. You can even look and see if I'm part of that page. If you want to join a Facebook page and don't see me there, then sometimes there's a reason why I'm not there. Some of these guys are kind of shady. They run some shiesty pages, and I don't have time for that. So anyway, big shout out to Joe. He's been a supporter for a long time. Very grateful for his for what he inputs. So yeah, we're going to jump right into a topic that could go on for several podcasts, but, and I've talked about it before, but it's always something that seems like I get asked about repetitively and I have to cover it. You know, I should just cover it because it's one of those things, but it is suspension. You know, there is a lot of new people entering the scout world. Hello, new people. And one of the biggest complaints that you hear is ride. Everyone is used to modern cars, modern trucks, that ride so much better than the scouts do. And part of that is they're comparing, you know, 50-year-old wore out suspension with their brand new Subaru, you know, and it just doesn't work like that. Like, you can't compare a solid axle car or truck. I mean, I'm sorry, I've been watching Ultra 4 racing, and they refer to everything as cars. So you can't compare a solid axle truck to an independent suspension anything. The ride is just different. It's very difficult to make a solid axle truck ride like an independent suspension car. Like, it pretty much, you have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to make that happen. So, first of all, you have to lower your expectations. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. Unless you want to spend 30 grand on coilovers and links and, you know, a week in the desert doing suspension tuning so that King or Fox can dial you in exactly how you need. And we've done that for our customers in the past. And they ride amazing. They handle great. They ride awesome. But it all comes at a cost. So, we'll start at the bottom and try to work up. I'll try my best to keep it in the half-hour range. So looks like I've got 25 minutes left. So your Scouts come from the factory with leaf springs, and that is same 8800s and Scout 2s, leaf sprung. And at the end of those leaves, you've got a shackle. And those leaf springs have rubber bushings in them, and they pivot. The shackle end will swing on bolts. And what happens is when the leaf spring, because it has an arch, when it compresses, it flattens out. That shackle will swing out, forward or backwards, depending on how it's oriented. And then the shock absorber will absorb some of that movement and then also control the rebound of the spring. Because if you know anything about springs, coil springs are an example, just a different shape than a leaf spring. But you know that if you throw a coil spring at the ground, it'll just immediately bounce back up at your face. And if there is a shock absorber or something to slow that rebound down, it won't spring back at your face. And so the same principle is applied to the shocks under your Scout. That's part of the roughness. You want kind of a soft, what's the word? Up travel, compression. That's the word. You want kind of a soft compression to let the wheel move up and not transfer that load to the chassis and then make the truck bounce. You want a soft compression, but you also want kind of a stiff rebound, because you don't want the spring to unload and force the truck to bounce back. There's a ton of valving variables that go into setting up shocks, and that's why these ones that are just off the shelf are kind of like a generic valving. And so, even the adjustable, like those gimmicky Rancho 9000s with the adjustable knob, they do. It's slightly adjustable, but it's still wildly variable. So, that's pretty much how leaf springs work. They flatten out and they rebound, and they always want to go back to that curved shape. So that's why you have to have a shock absorber that can control the movement. So a couple of things in the stock setups to get the best ride. You want new bushings, and rubber bushings are the softest and will absorb the most of the small stuff, like vibration and little things like that. But the trade-off is they wear out quickly, and they create other handling issues. Like they can contribute to body roll, and they can contribute to wander. Because they're soft, they don't support the system well enough, and they can let the leaf springs wobble around. So I personally like urethane bushings. They are stiffer, but provide more control, and they're way more durable. So it's important, if you put the urethane bushings in, to make sure that they are well greased or lubricated, I should say. I don't like to use grease on them. The suspension company will send, if you order bushings, they come with these little packets of white grease, and you can use those between the bushing and the spring itself in that eye, but we avoid using it on the metal part, on the sleeve and the bolt. We don't like to use that grease in there because it kind of attracts dirt and can create other problems down the road. We use copious amounts of silver anti-seize. Comes in that gray bottle with a brush, and you brush it on. Gets on everything, so be prepared for that. But silver anti-seize, even when it dries out, it turns into like graphite powder. So it's still a lubricant even when it dries, versus grease that when it dries out or gets filled with dirt, it just turns into, grinding compound. So we use a lot of silver anti-seize, and then it also helps for in the future if you have to do any repairs, you won't have hardware that's stuck together, because it's just protecting of corrosion goes a long ways towards the enjoyability of the rig. So, another thing that I've seen guys do to help with that is they'll undo the center pin on the leaf springs and separate them out, hit each leaf with a wire wheel on your grinder, get all the rust and corrosion off of each leaf, and then they make like Teflon material that you can put between each leaf. My only problem with that is that over time it'll start to work its way out. But you will see on like higher end leaf spring packages, they will have Teflon sliders in the end of each leaf spring. They'll have punched a hole, and then these Teflon sliders actually snap into place. So that actually goes a long ways in helping the leaf spring slide. So if you have a spring shop that's local to you, probably you're gonna have to be in kind of a larger city for that. But some of them will do that. They will punch a hole in the end of your leaf spring for a Teflon pad. And I know of other spring shops that do that. So if you want to keep your stock height but improve your ride, I would look into that, having Teflon pads added. And since you got them apart, put in a new leaf spring center pin anyways, because it probably needs it. And then like I said, your shackles, since they are traveling back and forth, like every time that spring moves up and down, that shackle is moving. So lots of lubricant on those bolts and the anti-seize and all that. You really, really want those shackles to swing. When you tighten them up, making sure you're using locking hardware, not lock washers, but actual top lock, metal locking nuts. And don't cinch them up super tight. If you tighten up those shackles real tight, then they're going to cause binding, which is going to get transferred into your ride. So again, make sure that the shackles can swing free, but not so free that there's side-to-side lateral movement in the shackle or the spring. And then same with the rear or front, whichever direction you're working. Those can go a long ways towards improving your ride. And then, the next step is shocks. I would consider white rockets or white body, anything white, Ranchos, Skyjackers, whatever. They're all pretty much the same. And I know some of these guys will argue that they're, Skyjacker whatevers are way better than Ranchos. I've yet to see that in real life. I've blown up Ranchos, brand new Ranchos, put them on a Scout, and then driven through the desert. And in 25 minutes, they are smoking. Seals are burned out. All the oil is bubbled out of them. The nitrogen is gone. Rancho shocks are great for the street, but pretty much nowhere else, in my opinion. Obviously, you can tell Rancho is not a sponsor of the show. what we really like to use around here for out of the box performance are Bilsteins, the 5100 series. Generally, there's 2 different valvings for various applications. If you look in the catalog, not under the model, but you actually go into the Bilstein, the back pages of the catalog, and order by length. And generally there'll be 2 options, 2 valving options, and we always go with the stiffest valving option because of the rebound. You, like I said, you want that stiff for that spring to unload as slowly as you can get away with, to help keep the truck from bucking around. And you can't valve for every application. It's just the best of what's available off the shelf. They're like $90 a shock, and they seem to hold up pretty well. You can step up in the world and get some Bilstein like 7100s or Fox 2.0s that are actually rebuildable and revalvable. But to go that route requires a lot of legwork, where they're going to send you a shock that has a base setting. You're going to go run it. You're going to tell them what you experience. You have to send it back to them. They will valve it based on your input, send it back to you, run it again, and you just have to do that dance until you get to a performance that you are satisfied with. And again, that can be stock or lifted applications. Lift springs, of course, are always going to ride rougher because of the arch. Just more arch means more roughness. Some manufacturers have figured out how to give you more lift and limit some of the rough, like Deaver or Alcan, but you're looking at $500 a leaf pack at that point. So it is expensive to get springs that work how you want. But again, if you're looking for the utmost best possible ride, that's where it's at. So one thing too, a lot of people overlook are bump stops. I would definitely recommend some good bump stops, but something that is soft or like progressive, like the Energy ones that are kind of triangle shaped that have a hole in the middle. That's a good one. The Nissan Pathfinder ones that IH Parts America sells would have they're kind of figure 8 shaped and they got the holes in them. That's a great one too. I have a set of those on my black rock crawler, and they really do act like progressive bump stops. So if you hit something really hard, like a speed bump or a curb or a ditch, the front end is going to come up so fast that the shock won't be able to slow it down, and the axle is just going to travel like crazy. So to help slow the axle down at the end of its travel, the compressionable bump stops will help make it less jarring for you in the cab as well. I mean, you're still going to feel a jolt just because you just hit a speed bump at 40, but it won't knock your fillings out like it would have with the solid rubber bump stops that the Scouts had stock. So I know you don't always want to be on the end of your bump stops, but it is a thing to consider when putting together your suspension system, is those extreme ends. I wouldn't consider limiting straps or anything like that, because you aren't going to have long travel springs, but those kinds of things can go a long ways towards improving the ride at the extreme end of the suspension travel. Just general movement, making sure when your shocks are put on that they're tight, but again, they're not overly tight, and you have good locking hardware, lots of anti-seize on all the moving parts. That all really goes a long ways towards the smoothness and movement of the suspension. And if you've gone through all that and you still aren't stoked about how it rides or whatever, then you can start looking into other options like the aftermarket springs, like Devers. They'll have 10 leaf springs in a pack, but each spring is 3/16 of an inch thick. And that does the same thing as having a 5-leaf pack where each leaf is 3/8 of an inch thick. The thinner the leaves, the easier they are to move. So they have to put more leaves in a pack to get the same load capacity, but they also move easier. So looking into a leaf package that has more leaves that are thinner is probably the next step, with either the Devers or the Alcans or the Atlases. And then, if you want to go beyond that, then you start looking at other leaf manufacturers and longer leaf packages. The stock Scouts have 52-inch long springs in the back, and that's the same as a GM leaf spring, except the width is a little different. So the rear leaves generally are pretty soft, but if you look, most leaf packs only have 4 in them in your stock Scout. So I would look at an aftermarket package that had 7 or 8 thin leaves, which would probably go a long ways towards improving that ride. But in the front, you can get away with having longer springs put in, that because longer springs will ride better. They flex better. They handle impact and load better. So there's something to consider, having long springs put in the front. We're not going to get into the shackle reversal debate today, because that adds a whole other variable to things, and it's not so much about making the suspension work, it's about changing the dynamic of the suspension. So, just like I'm probably not going to talk too much about coilovers and links and stuff today, because that's not where we are. And I have talked about that in the past. If you want to go back through some of the old podcasts, I think I did cover links and coilovers in one of those. But no, if you want to stay in kind of a stock configuration, but you want a better ride, you look at those springs with more leaves, or longer springs. It's easier to put long springs on the front of a Scout, easier than you think anyways. The old days, a lot of guys use the Wagoneer, the old 4044s, which I don't even know if they're available anymore. But in the 90s and early 2000s, that was the hot ticket, was running the Rancho 4044s in the front of a Scout, because you only had to move the rear hanger back, because they had an offset center pin. But anyway, but that's the key. It's just getting the springs to move as easily as possible with as little friction as possible, and then having shocks that can control the axle movement so it doesn't transfer that jolt into the cab. And part of the problem with the Scouts is the weight bias is so terrible. They've got 3,000 pounds on the front axle and 1,500 pounds on the rear axle. So that creates a hard package to control. And so I've found the Scouts that ride the best are ones that are fairly stock. So if we're talking stock Scout, 4-cylinder Scouts ride way better than V8 Scouts, in my opinion. And then the other thing to do is, if you've got a spare tire, if you've got a medicine cabinet with tools and fluids in it, if you have or even a swinging tire carrier off the back, anything that adds some weight to the rear end to help kind of even out that weight bias. If you've got, and the same goes if you've added a winch bumper and a winch and a second battery and a bunch of lights, and you just keep adding more weight to the front of the Scout, it's going to make the front might ride a little better, but it's going to make the rear end buck and ride even worse. So I really recommend weight distribution in that respect. It just helps a lot. It really does. When your rig is balanced and your weight, front to rear is pretty close and side to side is pretty close, it goes a long ways in control and drivability. There are add-on sway bars. IH Parts America sells a kit. It's kind of universal, that help with body roll and some of that bucking that might occur from sudden hard jolts. That does help. We put that sway bar on a lot of rigs, especially like LS Scouts that see a lot of highway, a lot of cornering and that kind of stuff. We've definitely put the rear sway bar on to help keep the rear end settled down. So that would be something to consider as well. If you have a stock Scout, make sure you have the front sway bar, which is that plate that goes between the two shackles up front. Believe it or not, that is a sway bar, and that really goes a long ways in helping with control and drivability. Some guys take it off when they go off-road so that the springs will actually flex more and let the wheels travel more. That plate that's in the front, that is not just regular flat steel. That is spring steel also. So it's like having a third leaf spring in the front of the truck. So it does twist and flex with the shackles. But if you're going off-road and you really want the most out of it, I would say to take that off. The other thing too to look into is the straight steer brace that they sell. Most all the Lightline dealers sell some version of that. That braces the steering box and it goes across to the other frame rail. And by doing that, it stiffens the steering box up for sure, which will improve your drivability. But it also adds another layer of frame stiffness. So that, again, forces the suspension to work instead of the frame to flop around and twist and do all that. And so, anything that you can do to stiffen the chassis, to force the suspension to work and less slop, less roll in the body, in the chassis, it does. It adds up. So, you just keep working towards forcing the suspension to do what it needs to do instead of transferring all of its responsibilities into a flexi frame and a bunch of body roll and that kind of stuff. So it all adds up. Whether you start at the bottom and you just put new bushings in with good lube, and then you go to good shocks, and then you go to new springs with Teflon pads or whatever, and then you add the rear sway bar and the straight steer brace, and you just continue down that path, and you can get leaf springs to ride pretty well. But like I said, in the end, you're going to have to lower your expectations if you're used to driving a 2022 Denali every day, because your Scout won't ride like that without $80,000 worth of work. So anyway, hopefully that was informative. Hopefully you learned something. Please tell your friends. Please share this podcast. Go to YouTube, like, subscribe, follow along, all of it. It all matters. So I appreciate you guys very much. And until next time, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.